Heyo, it's AO. Today I wanted to do an in-depth breakdown of the Armored Core 6 gameplay trailer. I think there's a few easily missed but potentially juicy details that can tell us a lot about what we can expect from the upcoming Armored Core title. One quick disclaimer though, this is still just a gameplay trailer, and as such everything I say is just speculation. Anything and everything is probably subject to change. I just find it fun to geek out about these small details all the time. Here an AC is being dropped from orbit. The drop pod is reminiscent of the tech we've seen in a trailer for Armored Core 2. These came up in a mission or two across Generation 2, but weren't actually featured that heavily. I am rather fond of this tech in science fiction in general. I was always a huge fan of the ODST soldiers from Halo that use similar drop pods. I always used their helmets whenever I was playing in the multiplayer modes. Here I am crossing my fingers that we actually get to see some missions that start us being hot dropped from orbit. Here's some horizontal flight over a construction area. I'm noting that the AC isn't dropping vertically. In AC5 and Verdict Day, maintaining height was not that easy. You'd always be slowly falling downward. This may not be a huge detail, but this should give you an idea of the kind of minutiae I'm looking for in these shots. This shot reminds me of a mission from Armored Core 4, where we were similarly dropped from high altitude while dodging lasers all the way down. Armored Core games tend to reuse ideas like this, and it would be a great early mission to help teach players basic movement while giving us a unique and exciting mission. Now we're boosting towards what looks like some sort of giant mining machine. We actually have some very large machines like this in real life, just not on legs, because that's pretty hard. Not sure if we're expected to fight this thing or not. It doesn't appear like it would be built for combat. Maybe it could be used as a tutorial to help us fight similar sized enemies in later missions. Here we see our AC and another just ahead of us. Perhaps a player or non-player co-op mission? Armored Core has a history of doing both. I'm thinking the consort system from Armored Core 3 and Silent Line, as well as the more full co-op systems in Armored Core 4 Answer and Armored Core Verdict Day. In an IGN interview with From Software, it was mentioned that AC6 is primarily a single-player game, but that doesn't completely exclude the opportunities for co-op. We haven't heard much on this front, but I would be surprised if we don't see some level of jolly cooperation. We now get to see our first gameplay look at a quick boost. It's a fairly minor detail, but I want to note that the movement looks a tad bit more modest and controlled compared to the previous implementations of Quick Boost. It seems that there's a little bit less momentum maintained after finishing the Quick Boost. This may make rapid changes in directions more manageable. All Armored Core games have a certain amount of momentum built into each movement, but was especially true for some builds in Generation 5. So far, I'm liking what I'm seeing. I'm not exactly sure what kind of machine this is, but it seems to launch or aids in launching our AC upward rather quickly. I don't really know how it works, maybe some sort of anti-gravity or electromagnetic acceleration. It does look like the AC's legs are at least somewhat responsible for initiating the jump though. Either way, I'm guessing this machine serves as an equivalent to a giant ladder or elevator. Here we are fighting some sort of quad. Can't really get a good look at it, but it seems equipped in a very similar way to an AC. The quad legs also look very similar to a Gen 3 design. Given that, I'm going to assume it's an AC. Noteworthy is that it's equipped with quite the wide shield here, with cannons or rockets peeking out from over the top, and a machine gun from the side. This looks like some sort of back-mounted energy shield, and it reminds me a lot of Gundam Thunderbolt. also worth noting how similar and dissimilar this energy shield looks compared to the reveal trailer. Spoiler, but we don't see much more indication of Primal Armor throughout the rest of the gameplay trailer. I'm wondering if these shields were just stylized in the previous trailer in a way that made AC veterans think of Primal Armor. It's worth noting here that in the IGN interview I mentioned earlier, there was mention of a special maneuver to quickly close the difference from long to short range. However, I'm not sure how this maneuver would differ from just quick boosting forward. Maybe it's more of a guided system to aid melee attacks land more easily. Melee has always been one of the more difficult balance points in Armored Core games, despite its long history and prominence. The IGN article also mentions some sort of stagger meter. From the way it was described, sustained, rapid hits from machine guns or rifles could build up the stagger meter and eventually cause stun. Bigger hits, like that from a bazooka or a salvo of missiles, could cause stagger immediately. For any of you familiar with the Dark Souls franchise, this should sound an awful lot like poise. You might think that Armored Core is borrowing from Dark Souls here, but I would do well to remind you that Dark Souls borrowed it from Armored Core first. Defensive stability has been a feature in Armored Core since the early days, although how it functions did subtly change over time. Here we see some sort of scan wave being used. Its implementation seems very similar to scan mode in Armored Core 5. However, I will note that there isn't a recon drone in sight, and there isn't such a drastic change in the UI like we've seen in Armored Core 5. As such, I'm guessing that this scan wave may be some sort of specialty equipment, but that's just a guess at this point. Next, we see a few interesting things. The quad here is able to gain height somewhat easily, which indicates to me we aren't looking at the same boosting rules as in Armored Core 5. As a reminder, in Armored Core 5, you couldn't boost up, only glide slowly downward or drop directly down like a rock. The chief ways to gain height were with your leg's jump function or by climbing up a building with repeated wall kicks. The quad here does seem to jump, but seems to do it multiple times in midair. I'm actually a little confused by that and questioning if I'm understanding this correctly. The other thing we see is the quad spreading out its legs as it switches to some sort of aerial floating mode. IGN had mentioned this function for the quad in the interview, but I'm skeptical if IGN understood this correctly or not. It seems like an odd choice of mechanic to assign to the quad specifically. I was talking with a friend of mine, and he suggested that it might just be a function that all AC types had, and that FromSoft is just showing off this with the quad because of its unique animation. Then again, this trailer does showcase multiple leg types all doing something different in this trailer, so maybe not. The next few seconds is very dense with combat information, so buckle up. Here we get to see an AC dodging diagonally upward, which, given that it was near the ground, is quite the momentum shift. Dodging diagonally upward with a quick boost is possible in Armored Core 4, but to get that sort of upward momentum, you had to spend a few seconds already building that vertical momentum. Not sure if it's noteworthy, but the AC featured here seems to be a reverse joint, which are known for their massive jumps. Maybe this type of movement is tied to the jump function of your legs somehow. Here we get a display of a very smooth quick turn maneuver, which, if you aren't aware, is a mechanic originating in Armored Core 4 to turn your AC very quickly using a special quick boost. Nothing ground-shattering, but it's worth noting that the move still exists. Shortly after, we can see the reverse joint raising its left arm to fire some sort of energy projectile. Now this is potentially a very big deal for how the shooting mechanics of the game work. In Gen 3 of Armored Core, if you were using a projectile weapon in your left arm instead of a laser blade, for example, it had a sort of handicap on its use. This was referred to in the community as the left arm delay. The IGN article did mention briefly that melee weapons were exclusive to the left arm. This has the rumblings of returning to the dual-wielding mechanics of Generation 3, as opposed to Generation 4 or later, where there were no distinguishable differences between your left and right arm. Now, while this may be a big deal, I'll remind everyone that this is just speculation. I can't really tell what kind of weapon this truly is, or if there's some additional nuance here. Maybe this left arm attack is actually considered some sort of melee attack, or maybe this attack is special in some other way. I just want to point out that this reminds me very heavily of the Gen 3 dual-wielding mechanics. Here we see what appears to be the return of the kick, or boost charge, I believe it was called in Armored Core 5. Basically a quick boost into a high-powered kick attack. In Armored Core 5, the damage was much higher if you were using heavyweight legs. However, I always thought that the kick of the reverse joint seemed like it should have done the most damage. Given that the reverse joint is using the kick here, maybe we'll see that adjustment when the game launches. I'm also curious to see how much damage the kick does overall. In Armored Core 5, I killed a lot of very slow enemies using this, and it completely replaced my usage of any other melee weapons. I trust that FromSoft will adjust the viability of this melee option accordingly. We get a treat of tank gameplay here. Note that it appears to be shown moving surprisingly quickly and very clearly dual-wielding some heavy weapons. It is also very clearly showing off weapon switching. Oh boy! The hanger switch in Armored Core 5 was painfully slow, which was perhaps appropriate for the more tactical style of game they were trying to make. However, here, after a quick weapon swap, the attack is nearly instant. Also note that it is firing its left arm weapon with no left arm delay. So perhaps the left arm delay I was referring to earlier doesn't actually exist, or there are ways to bypass it. The obvious cool thing to point out here is the laser whip on display. There seems to be a large variety of melee-style weapons available, and I am all for it. The less obvious point to notice here is the flamethrower on the other AC. Flamethrowers have had a rough time with viability in the Armored Core franchise. I'm wondering, with this game's seemingly more close-range focus, if a flamethrower could shine. Also, if a flamethrower exists in this game, I'm also wondering if we can expect the return of any and all heat mechanics. It's also worth noting that flamethrowers have existed in games with and without heat mechanics, though. Its inclusion is something not to speculate too hard over. Some type of segmented mechanical worm enemy? Kind of reminds me of an enemy from Nier Automata. Presumably this is some sort of boss-like enemy. Fighting against multiple AC opponents here, typically these would be the hardest engagements and often relegated to the end game. We get a glimpse of the AC using the EMP blast again. However, once again, we don't get a clear look of what the effects of the attack actually are. Next, we get to see some story dialogue, all of which is of questionable importance at this point. However, at the same time, we get a bunch of shots of boss battle gameplay. FromSoft has been seemingly trying to distance this game from being called more Souls-like. However, even if it's true, I have to say that these bosses have never looked more Souls-like. And I mean that in the best way possible. Many of these attacks show off clear tells that they're going in for an attack. This is something that was ever present in Souls games, and something sorely missing for many AC boss battles of the past. Often, the closest tell we would ever get is that they are getting within range, or it's been 5 or 10 seconds since the last time they used their attack. This is something that I can be quite happy seeing. FromSoft has been really hitting it out of the park recently when it comes to boss battle design. This is another very noteworthy shot where we can clearly see a biped AC using a back cannon. This is a big deal for me. Cannons and how the various games balance them have always been a big fascination of mine. Early gens balanced their high power by limiting them to tanks and quads. Gen 4 handicapped them by giving them slower lock-on times and recoils. And Gen 5 just sort of nuked them into oblivion, which kept them pretty niche for non-tanks. My question at this point is, what are they going to do to cannons this time to differentiate them from ARM weapons? I'd love to hear the opinions of my fellow AC veterans in the comments below. Also worth noting that it appears that I may have called it correctly in my last video when I suggested that AC6 might be going for a hybrid system for back weapons. That is to say, you could equip ARM weapons or back cannons in the back weapon slots. I'm eager to see how this system plays out in the future. And that's it for this video. Overall, there was a lot to digest this time, and I'm more eager than ever to explore the unique mechanics of this new Armored Core title. When this gameplay trailer came out, I immediately booked time off work so that I could sink my teeth into it when it drops. Anyway, this has been AO. Take it easy out there. Bye.